The New Scramble, Africa and the Battle for Tomorrow, Part 1, The Echoes of Empire. Chapter 1. The Ghosts of Berlin. Few know this, but in a private room at the Sofitel Hotel in Abidjan in November 2017, executives from Glencore, Trafigura, and a handful of lesser-known commodity firms sat down with government officials from Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Liberia. The agenda was clear: secure multi-decade rights to some of the richest cocoa and mineral reserves in West Africa, at bargain rates. No journalists were invited, no minutes were kept, and no one ever spoke publicly about the deals signed that night. They called it an investment summit. It was a heist. The echoes of Berlin are everywhere, if you know where to listen. In 1884, a dozen European powers gathered around a long oak table in Berlin and carved up the African continent like a Sunday roast. Congo to Leopold, Sudan to Britain, Madagascar to France. The logic was simple: draw lines, claim land, extract everything. Never mind the kingdoms crushed or the millions enslaved. Fast forward 140 years. The names have changed. Shell instead of the British Crown, Huawei instead of the Portuguese Empire, BlackRock instead of King Leopold. But the mission remains the same. Take what is valuable. Leave what is broken. Only now the lines are drawn not with maps but with contracts. Not with bayonets but with bank loans. Not with missionaries but with CEOs. Mariama Diouf never heard of the Sofitel meeting. She was too busy trying to keep her farm in Bouaké alive. The land had been in her family for generations. Mango trees, cassava fields, a small patch of cocoa. A life carved from sweat and stubbornness. In February 2018, soldiers showed up without warning. The government, they said, had sold the land for development. Bulldozers followed. The mango trees snapped like toothpicks. The fields burned. By nightfall, Mariama's home was a skeleton of ash. She received no compensation. No alternative. Just a signature she never gave, on a document she never saw. "I have no more land," she told me when I visited her later that year. "I have no more life." She wasn't the only one. Across Côte d'Ivoire, an estimated 67,000 small farmers have been displaced in the last decade. Most without formal eviction notices. Most never make the news. Here's the part they don't want you to know. While the world watches elections and peacekeeping missions, the real battles are fought in back rooms, brokered in currencies far richer than ballots. Take Liberia. In 2012, under President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, praised by the West as a reformer, the government quietly leased a quarter of the country's arable land to foreign corporations for up to 99 years. Palm oil, rubber, timber, gone. The people living on it? An inconvenience. In Ghana, it's worse. Leaked contracts show that from 2009 to 2018, nearly 6 million hectares, over a quarter of the country's total landmass, were signed over for mining and agribusiness, often under public-private partnerships backed by the World Bank. And what of the Congo? In the Democratic Republic of Congo, Chinese mining giants like Sycamines, operating under the so-called minerals for infrastructure deals, strip billions in cobalt and copper while the promised roads and schools remain ghost projects. According to a classified report from Congo's own Public Accounts Committee in 2021, which I obtained from a whistleblower, only 6% of pledged infrastructure projects were completed. 6%. The pattern is clear, brutal, and deliberate. 1. Offer infrastructure or debt relief. 2. Demand mineral or land concessions. 3. Bind governments with secret contracts laced with punitive terms. 4. Extract wealth. 5. Leave devastation. If this sounds familiar, it should. It is colonialism rebranded. The Berlin Conference didn't end, it mutated. There are villains, and there are resistors. In Burkina Faso, Thomas Sankara once warned, "He who feeds you, controls you." He tried to break the cycle, rejecting IMF loans, nationalizing land, urging true African unity. They killed him in 1987. The people behind it? A tangled web of local elites, French operatives, and international banks, all threatened by the idea of an Africa that couldn't be bought. Today, a new generation rises. In Senegal, young activists from the Yen Amare movement march against corrupt deals masked as foreign investment. In Kenya, lawyers like Okia Omtata fight court battles to overturn illegal land grabs. In Uganda, communities like the Apa residents risk their lives to resist forced evictions by military-backed conservation projects. Each battle is local, the war is global. When you pull back the curtain, the machinery is naked. Banks, Standard Chartered, JP Morgan, structure the predatory loans. Corporations, Glencore, Total Energies, Huawei, carve up the resources. Governments, both African and foreign, rubber stamp the deals. NGOs, provide the moral cover. Sustainable development, they call it. Media mostly looks the other way. And who pays the price? People like Mariama. People you'll never see on TV. People whose futures are written away in boardrooms they are barred from entering. It would be easier, cleaner, to believe this is just corruption. A few bad leaders, a few bad apples. But the truth is worse. It is a system. Built to be extractive. Engineered to reward betrayal. Designed to punish resistance. It is the same system that stole Africa's bodies for slave ships. Its land for plantations. Its minerals for empires. Only now it wears a business suit and carries a development grant. In the Sofitel that night, after the contracts were signed, champagne was poured. One executive joked, according to a leaked email, that we've outdone the Belgians. He wasn't wrong. He just forgot the ending. The scramble may enrich the looters for now, but the reckoning is coming. Africa is not passive. Africa is not property. As Sankara once said, and the youth of today still chant, we have not inherited the earth from our ancestors. We have borrowed it from our children. The question that haunts the new scramble is simple and final. Whose future are you building? And whose are you destroying? Barter. Chapter 2. Independence was never enough. Few people outside Mali remember the morning of September 22, 1960, when the golden flag of the newborn Republic of Mali rose over the capital city of Bamako. There were speeches. There were drums. There were tears. A French general watched from the edge of the ceremony, stiff as stone, while the young president Modibo Keïta spoke of freedom, dignity, and a future written by our own hands. The crowd roared. Children climbed trees for a glimpse of history. Women in brilliant waxcloth dresses sang songs older than the empire that had just been expelled. But while the crowds danced in the streets, a secret document was being signed inside a dim office at the French embassy. It was called the Cooperation Agreement. It sounded harmless. It was lethal. Under its terms, Mali would keep using the CFA franc, a colonial currency still printed and controlled by the French treasury. Mali's gold and cotton exports would continue to pass through French companies. French military advisors would remain embedded in Mali's army. French technical assistants would oversee key ministries, and any Malian attempt to create new trade deals, new alliances, or, God forbid, a new currency, would be considered a violation. The ink was still wet on Mali's birth certificate when it was shackled back to its former master. Nobody told the farmers in Ségou. Nobody warned the fishermen in Mopti. They believed what they had fought for, what they had bled for. They believed they were free. Within a year, the truth began to bleed through the cracks. Mali's cotton prices, the nation's economic backbone, were fixed by French companies at artificially low rates. Loans for infrastructure were tied to French banks at punitive interest rates. Military aid came bundled with demands. Mali must align with French strategic interests or be cut off. By 1962, Mali was drowning in debt it never chose, for projects it didn't control, paid in a currency it didn't print. The independence banners still fluttered above the markets, but beneath them, hunger gnawed at the future. Modibo Keïta tried to fight back. In 1962, he declared Mali's intention to create a national currency, the Malian franc. He announced agricultural cooperatives to break foreign monopolies. He pushed for Pan-African alliances with Ghana, Guinea, and Egypt, leaders who had also sniffed out the poisoned bait of post-colonial deals. France responded with cold fury. Within months, French banks froze Malian assets. Exports were sabotaged by paperwork delays and logistical problems. A whisper campaign, led by French intelligence services, spread rumors that Keïta was a communist puppet, a madman, a threat to stability. In 1968, as Keïta's domestic support faltered under the weight of economic warfare, a military coup, backed quietly by French operatives and mercenaries, toppled him. He died in prison a few years later, isolated and broken. Mali's national currency was scrapped. The country was dragged back into the CFA zone. French business interests returned like vultures. Mali's story was not unique. It was the template. In Senegal, Léopold Sédar Senghor accepted French technical partnerships, only to find his economic policies dictated by Paris. In Côte d'Ivoire, Félix Houphouët-Boigny eagerly embraced French companies, but discovered they controlled 75% of his nation's key industries within a decade. Across Africa, the pattern was eerily precise. Once, independence ceremonies to soothe the masses. 2. Secret economic treaties to retain colonial control. 3. Currency manipulation to neuter sovereignty. 4. Debt traps to enforce compliance. 5. Military and intelligence support for compliant regimes and coups against the disobedient. The flags changed. The masters did not. Today, the CFA franc, a currency rooted in colonial conquest, is still used by 14 African countries, printed in France, governed by European monetary policy. A daily, humiliating reminder that sovereignty signed on paper means nothing if it is not backed by control over resources, currency, and destiny. Debt, too, has metastasized. According to a leaked 2018 memo from the World Bank's Africa Department, obtained via whistleblower, over 65% of sub-Saharan African countries were either at high risk of debt distress or already drowning in unsustainable obligations, most of it incurred under the banners of development, investment, or good governance initiatives. In real terms, this means billions flowing outward in debt repayments while clinics collapse. Infrastructure projects designed to serve extraction, not people. Leaders trapped between the blackmail of foreign creditors and the rage of their betrayed populations. Meet Fatou Diarra. In 2023, she stood outside the World Bank's regional office in Bamako holding a cardboard sign that read simply, "You call it aid, I call it robbery." Fatou is a school teacher, or she was before budget cuts, mandated by IMF loan conditions, closed the school where she taught. She now sells vegetables by the roadside between protests. "I was born free," she told me, or so they said, but every time I open my eyes I see chains. Chains forged in debt, chains hidden behind treaties, chains politely called cooperation. Independence was never enough, because economic dependency is simply colonization by other means. Mali's tragedy, and Africa's broader betrayal, was not simply the loss of a leader like Modibo Keita. It was the theft of the future he tried to imagine, an Africa that owned its land, printed its money, traded on its own terms, defended its own dignity. That future was crushed not with armies this time, but with contracts, clauses, currencies, and loans. It remains the battle still being fought today, by Fatou, by thousands like her, by a generation that refuses to accept a world where their destiny is forever mortgaged to the ghosts of empire. The Berlin Conference drew maps with ink and arrogance. Today the maps are drawn with debt and deception. The tools have changed. The conquest has not. And the real question, the one the powerful fear you asking, is this: when will Africa's freedom stop being just a flag and start being a fact? Chapter 3. Borders drawn in blood. Few realize it, but at 3:17 p.m. on February 9, 1885, a German bureaucrat drew a straight line across a blank map in Berlin, slicing through forests, rivers, villages, and families he had never seen, would never visit, and could not pronounce. That pencil stroke, careless as a child's doodle, created the border between what would become Nigeria and Cameroon. Today, 140 years later, Fatima Musa still cannot cross that line without risking her life. Fatima was born in the village of Gwoza, perched at the rocky heart of northeastern Nigeria. Her cousin, Mariam, was born just across the hills, in Mora, technically Cameroon, but in truth the same people, the same songs, the same prayers carried on the dry Harmattan wind. As children, they ran barefoot across the hills, their laughter louder than the goats, their futures as wide as the sky. There was no border to them, only a path. That changed the year Fatima turned 15. One morning, men with guns stormed Gwoza, waving black flags and chanting the name of Boko Haram. They burned homes, shot elders, kidnapped girls. Fatima's family fled toward Mora, desperate to find Mariam. At the checkpoint, Cameroonian soldiers stopped them. They demanded papers, passports, ID cards, documentation no refugee could possibly carry. "You are Nigerians," the soldiers said. "You are the problem." They turned Fatima's family back into the flames. Mariam later told Fatima, in a hushed phone call years later, that she had screamed and begged at the soldiers' boots until they pushed her aside. They were cousins, sisters in everything but blood. Now they were enemies, because a German bureaucrat's pen had said so. The border between Nigeria and Cameroon is a fiction written in blood. So are the borders between Mali and Burkina Faso, Sudan and South Sudan, Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Everywhere you look, Africa's borders are scars. Gashes carved without care, splitting tribes, families, water sources, and dreams. At Berlin, not a single African was invited to the table. Not a single elder was consulted. The map makers had no knowledge of local cultures, and no interest. They drew lines to please Europe's egos, not Africa's realities. Result: 177 ethnic groups split between at least 2 countries. 45 ethnic groups divided across 3 or more nations. Entire ecosystems fractured. Rivers controlled by one country while their sources lie in another. It was madness. It was deliberate. Divide and rule, and divide again. The consequences today are catastrophic. Take South Sudan, the world's newest nation, born in 2011. It was supposed to be a triumph. a people finally free from Khartoum's domination. Instead, the colonial borders left the Dinka, Nuer, and Shilluk peoples crammed together in an artificial state, competing over land, oil, and power lines that never respected their history. By 2013, civil war erupted. Over 400,000 dead, millions displaced. One UN official I spoke to in Juba in 2019 put it bluntly: "We are paying today for lines drawn by men who didn't know the difference between a Dinka and a Nuer, and didn't care." Even where war hasn't broken out, the borders bleed in quieter ways. In Niger and Mali, nomadic Tuareg communities are criminalized for crossing lines their ancestors never recognized. In Somalia, the arbitrary partitioning of Somali-speaking people across Ethiopia, Kenya, and Djibouti fuels endless unrest. In the Congo, the absurd colonial borders have created a patchwork of militias, rebel groups, and smuggling corridors so complex that no government, not even the Congolese one, truly controls the eastern provinces. The old maps are killing the future. Fatima's story didn't end at the checkpoint. Turned away from safety, her family wandered for weeks. Her father was killed in an ambush. Her younger brother disappeared, likely taken by militants. Fatima and her mother eventually made it to a Nigerian displacement camp, where aid workers counted them as numbers on a spreadsheet, but never asked their names. When I met her in Maiduguri in 2022, she was working as a cleaner for pennies, dreaming of somehow reaching Mariam. Still just a few hills away, still impossibly out of reach. "The border," she said, "is not a line on a map. It is a wall built inside your heart." Here's the part no one talks about. The West still defends these borders, still props up governments that enforce them, still refuses to allow serious continental border reform, because instability creates opportunity for intervention, extraction, and control. You don't need colonial armies if you have colonial borders that guarantee perpetual conflict. The new Scramble isn't just about minerals, markets, and megaprojects. It's about controlling a continent still chopped into pieces. Pieces easy to dominate, easier to pit against one another, and easiest of all to silence. There are resistors. The Pan-African visionaries, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Julius Nyerere, all dreamed of breaking the chains of colonial borders. A united Africa, a federation strong enough to refuse the world's crumbs. They were mocked. They were sabotaged. Some were murdered. Today, youth movements like Africans Rising whisper those dreams anew. In border towns like Goma, in refugee camps in Uganda, in marketplaces in Dakar, young people cross illegally, defiantly, stubbornly, refusing to accept that an accident of European greed should define their lives. Fatima and Mariam still speak over WhatsApp when they can find signal and afford data. They dream of one day opening a school for displaced children, a place where no one will ask for papers at the door. A place without borders, a future stolen once, but maybe, just maybe, still within reach. The men in Berlin believed they had won forever, but they forgot something vital. Maps can be redrawn. Lines can be erased. Scars can heal, if the people demand it. And across Africa today, the demand is rising, hotter and louder and more unstoppable with every passing year. Our land, our people, our future, not yours to divide.